This is a Next.js 15 project that I have created, and I have implemented two important things in this one. First of all, I have implemented authentication using Next.auth version 5. And the second thing is I have also added this user registration feature. In this video, let me show you how to write end-to-end test for your Next.js applications using Playwright. I'm going to show you how do you write test for both public and protected routes. I'm also going to show you how do you persist the login state so that you do not have to log in the user every single time before running your test. And then we will also take a look at testing role-based features. For example, in my application, if I just sign in, let me just do a quick sign in, test@user.com. Password is test1234. So if I log into my application, you can see that the current role is user and I can go to the settings page. But if I try going to this admin page, I cannot access that. And even if I put this address in the address bar like admin, you can see that I basically get redirected back to this home page. But if I go to settings page, change my role to admin, and then try going to this admin page, you can see that now I am able to access this page. So we are also going to see how do you test stuff like this. Alright, so the first step is to install Playwright. Now in order to install Playwright in your existing Next.js application, you need to execute this command npm create Playwright. If you're using npm, the command for you would be npm init playwright. When I execute this, this is going to ask me a few questions. First, this is asking me where to put your end-to-end test. I'm simply going to choose all of the default options that it gives me. We are not using GitHub Actions workflow right now, so I'm going to say no for this. And then I want Playwright to install all of the necessary browsers also. Now, after executing this command, you are going to see a few things. First of all, we have this test folder, and then we have this test example folder. We can actually delete this test example folder because we do not really care about this. And then we have this most important file, which is this playwright.config.ts. So this is the file that is responsible for configuring your Playwright setup. We are going to take a look at this a little bit later, but the first thing that we need to do right now, let's go to package.json file, and then let's add two scripts. So I'm going to add two scripts. First of all, I'm going to say test end-to-end. And whenever I run this script, I want to execute this command, npm execute playwright test. So I'm going to copy this, paste it right over here. And similarly for UI, I'm going to add another script, test e2e UI. And in this one, we just have to provide a UI flag. All right. Now we can use both of these commands to instruct Playwright to start executing our test. And since the test directory has been set to this test folder, so any file that you put inside of this test folder that ends with .spec.ts extension will become a test file. Now before we go ahead, I want to tell you two important things. First of all, let's take a look at some of the dependencies that we are using for this project. You can see that we are using the Next.js version 15, 15.0.3 specifically. And for Next.auth, we are using version 5, beta 25. Alright. Second thing is, this video is not about showing you how to write perfect test for your Next.js application, because that is something that is highly dependent upon what kind of application you are building and what is important to you. The purpose of this video is to show you how to handle some of the most common scenario that you are going to come across when you'll be writing end-to-end test using Playwright. Alright. Okay, let's now take a look at some of the configuration options that are present inside of this Playwright configuration file. First of all, I'm going to remove all of these comments. So the first option is test directory. So this is pretty straightforward. With this, we are just telling Playwright, this is where we'll be keeping all of our tests. When you set fully parallel to true, you are essentially telling Playwright that you are allowed to execute test parallelly. This significantly reduces the overall test time, because when this is set to true, Playwright can actually execute your test parallelly, thereby saving you a lot of time. Now this option forbid only is set to true or false depending upon if this process.env.ci value is present or not. Now in order to understand this forbid only, I want you to consider this scenario. Let's say you have written hundreds and thousands of end-to-end tests for your application. During development, when you try to execute those tests, they are going to take a lot of time. So what you do generally is that there is this method available to you .only, which you can use to just tell Playwright, you do not have to execute all of these tests, just execute those tests that has .only methods. And let's say you forgot to remove this .only method and you push the code to your CI/CD pipeline. So in that scenario, what we're doing is, first of all, if the continuous integration is enabled, and when you have pushed your code to CI/CD pipeline and you have implemented continuous integration and deployment in your project, even if the sum of the test cases contains .only methods, Playwright is going to ignore them. It is still going to execute all of those tests when this forbid only is set to true, right? And by the way, this double exclamation mark here simply means just give me a Boolean value, either true or false, and I do not really care about what this holds, okay? Now, similar to this forbid only option, we have this retries. Sometimes what happens is your tests are going to be fail for whatever reason. So in case of CI, it is going to retry your test for 2 times. But in case of, let's say, local development, it is not going to retry. Similarly for workers, so in case of CI/CD, Playwright is just going to spawn one worker process. That means your test is going to be executed in a sequential manner. But in local, this is set to undefined. And when you set this to undefined, Playwright can automatically choose how many workers it needs to spawn to execute your test in parallel. Reporter is set to HTML, which basically means after the test has been executed, generate a report and save that report in an HTML format so that I can access that report later. We're going to see this report a little bit later in the video. And then we have this use property. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, okay? All right. Then we have this projects array. In the projects array, we basically specify for which browsers and for what viewports we want our test to be executed. So you can see right now, our test will be executed for desktop Chrome, desktop Firefox, desktop Safari. For the purpose of this video, I'm simply going to remove all of these options because this is completely unnecessary for our use case. And similarly, if you want your test to be executed for mobile devices, you can do something like this. I'm going to remove this code because I do not need this. All right. And then the last option that we need to understand is this web server. And what this web server allows you to do, let's say if you're running, and let's say you have directly run the command npm run test end-to-end. Now, when you're running these tests locally, you want your Next.js development server to be running at that time. But if the server is not running, you can automatically start the server by using this web server property. So for my specific case, what I'm going to be saying that if I execute the command npm run test and the development server is not running, you simply run this command npm run dev. And the URL I'm going to set is localhost 3000. All right. So at this point, we now have this basic understanding of what all of these options mean at this point. Now let's go to this test folder, and this test folder contains this example.spec.ts. Let's try to understand this example file. First of all, I'm going to get rid of this test because we do not really need this. Okay, let's see what we're doing here. First of all, we are importing test and expect from Playwright test. And then I'm calling this test method. Now, when I call this test method, it basically expects you to pass 2 arguments. In the first argument, you specify the purpose of the test. And in the second argument, you specify a callback function. This callback function gives you access to this page. And with the help of this page, we can do very useful things. So let me show you. If I open the terminal and I execute this command npm run test end-to-end, what this is going to do, first of all, this is going to start the development server, and then this is going to execute all of those tests. So you can see that it basically ran one test using one worker, and the test has been passed. And then after that, you can see that it actually has generated a report. You can actually see this report by executing this command, or by actually going to this folder Playwright report. You can see this contains this index.html file. I'm not going to open that, but you get the idea, right? Now, the second way you execute test is by running the second script that we have added, which is npm run test end-to-end with UI mode. So when I execute a command like this, it is actually going to open a window for me like this. Now, in the left side, you can see the name of the file, example.spec.ts. This file only contains one test. You can see the purpose or the description, you could say, the description of the test as title. And then you have this green play button. So when you click on this, Playwright is actually going to execute this test. And you can see the test has been passed. We can see over here. You can actually hover over each of these steps to see what is happening in each step. Okay. So what we are doing in this test is that we are actually going to playwright.dev, And then we expect the page to have the title Playwright. It is as simple as that. And if the title is Playwright, then this test passes, otherwise it fails. Okay, now this is not very useful for our scenario. So let's start writing test for our own application. Now I'm going to rename this file example.spec.ts to something like, let's say, auth.spec.ts. Now I'm going to divide my test in two parts basically, authenticated and unauthenticated. So authenticated test would be those tests in which you are required to be logged in, and unauthenticated test can be used for all those scenarios in which the user do not have to be logged in, essentially for all of the public routes. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm simply going to say test.describe, and you can think of describe as this method that basically lets you organize some of the similar codes in one place. Okay, I'm going to say unauthenticated user, and then this is going to expect me to pass a callback as the second argument. We can actually move this test block over here. Now if you think about it, let me just first start the development server, pnpm dev, then I'll come to browser, I'll refresh the page, so you can see we are currently logged in. And if you're talking about unauthenticated test, we are essentially talking about public routes. That means if I sign out, my public routes will be the sign in page and then the sign up page. So one of the things that I can probably test is my sign in or sign up page accessible or not. So I can essentially say unauthenticated user can access sign up page. And in this one, I'm simply going to go to this URL, auth sign up. Okay. When I go to this URL, I expect this page to have something, but not this particular thing. So let's try to find out what this page uniquely contains that will make sure that, okay, this page is being loaded in the browser. We can see, first of all, we can see if the URL matches with auth sign up. And the second thing is we can actually look for this particular text, create account. So if I just inspect this, we can see that this is actually a heading H3 level element that has this text create account. So whenever you have this need of accessing any element from your page, make sure you always use this method page.getByRole, because this is unlikely going to be changing even if you do any kind of refactoring later in your projects. So this getByRole method basically expects you to pass two arguments. In the first one, you specify the role of the element that you're looking for. So I'm essentially looking for an heading element, right? And then in the second argument, you can specify this object. This contains this name property, and then I can pass a regular expression over here. I'm essentially passing a regular expression with case insensitive. And with this, what I'm essentially saying is I'm essentially looking for an heading element that has this create account text. And it can be capital or small, it doesn't really matter. That is why I'm using this case insensitive, right? And I expect this element, first of all, I expect this element to be visible, okay? And whenever you're using expect, you need to await this. We can get rid of this piece of code. Okay, so here's what we're doing in a very simple manner. So we need to test if unauthenticated users can access sign up page. So we are going to this sign up page, and then we expect this page to contain this heading element with a text that is something related to this create account. And this text should be visible in the viewport. Let's see if this is working or not. I'm going to execute this command UI, and we can see our test over here. First of all, the name of the file auth.spec.ts, and then the name of the test unauthenticated user. And then, this describe log unauthenticated user. And then we have this test can access sign up page. When I press the green button, we can see that this test has been failed. And if I try going to this errors tab, you can see that we're getting this error, protocol error, cannot navigate to invalid URL. So it seems like the URL that we have passed over here is not correct. So what we need to do is I think we need to pass the entire URL like this. Okay, so we have added this over here. Now, when you do this, you do not have to restart this again. You can simply come here and then click on this reload. This is going to reload it, and then I can click on this, and this is going to start executing the test. And now you can see that the test is passing. We can see we are first going to this auth sign up page, and then we are looking for this heading element that has this create account text. And you can see on the right side, this is actually showing you that this is what we are looking for. Perfect. Now, this is not a very good practice that you include this base URL every single time whenever you need to go to a page. So a better approach for something like this would be include this base URL inside of your Playwright configuration file. So I can come over here, and inside of this use property, I have this base URL present. And here I can specify my base URL. And then I can restart my tests. Again, at this point, I'm executing my test with UI mode, okay? So if I come here and click on this to run my tests are still working fine, absolutely. So this is how you write test for, let's say, public routes, unauthenticated users, right? Okay, what if you want to write test for authenticated users? What if you want to test, can users access their settings page? Let's try doing that. First of all, I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call this authenticated user, and then let's say that they can access the settings page. Now, if we try going to the settings page right now, so I'll come here. First of all, I'm going to sign in page and log in as the user. You can see that if I click on this, it takes me to the settings page, which is present over here. That means we need to go to this URL, settings. And just to show you that this is actually not a public page, I can sign out. And then if I try going to this settings page, you can see that it redirects me back to the sign in page. That means it is a protected page. And now we are trying to access a protected page, right? So first of all, let's write the test. So we need to go to the settings, and then we expect an heading to present in this one that contains this text, let's say settings page. All right. So I can come here and reload this one. And now you can see two describe blocks over here, unauthenticated user and then authenticated user. When I try to run this test, can access the settings page, you will see that we tried going to the settings page, but then we got redirected back to the sign in page because we are not logged in. And then we waited for 5 seconds. And then after 5 seconds, the page got timed out, essentially. And if you think about it, this actually makes sense. You are not actually logged in, and that is why you are not able to access the settings page. So how do you fix this problem? Now, one of the ways to fix this problem is by doing a manual login. That means I can do something like this. Let me explain what I'm doing here. First of all, when this test starts executing, I am first going to this sign in page. I'm getting both email input and then password input. I'm filling these input with their respective email and password. Then I'm getting the sign in button. I'm clicking on the sign in button. Then I'm waiting for the login process to finish, which basically redirects me to the home page. And then here, when the user is actually logged in, we are trying to go to the settings page and checking if it contains an heading element that has this text settings page. Let's see if this is working or not. So if I come here, reload this one, execute this test, you can see that our test is working fine at this point. And I can actually hover over each of these steps to see what is exactly going on at each individual step. Perfect. Now, if you really think about it, this is not a very good practice to do something like this. Let's say we have just written this one single test, that test for protected routes. What if you want to test this for, let's say, 100 or 200 or 300 routes? So doing manual login every single time is going to waste your lot of time. So what can we do in this case? Let me show you. First of all, I'm going to delete this piece of code. Okay, like this. Now inside of this test folder, I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to call this setup. And then within this setup folder, I'm going to create this file global setup. Again, the name of this folder and the name of this file can be anything. Now this global setup file is just going to export this default function global setup. Let's actually make this async function. And in this file, we are actually going to generate a session token, add it to the cookie, and then we add this cookie to the browser context. By adding this cookie to the browser context, our user will be automatically logged in. So let's do this step by step. So here I'm putting some of the essential imports, for example, Chromium from Playwright test, path.env jwt, calling .env.config so that we can access environment variables inside of this file. And then I'm setting some of the constants over here, as you can see. Okay. Then inside of this global setup, I'm actually doing an environment check that if we do not have the auth secret available as an environment variable, let's throw an error auth secret is not defined. Then I'm actually creating a JWT payload. The type of this object is going to be exactly that matches with your JSON web token payload essentially. So my payload only contains this ID and role. And you can actually see this if I just go to this file next.auth.d.ts, which is present inside of this types folder. You can see that my JWT contains only ID and role property. This is really important because this is the exact information that you need to properly log the user in. Otherwise, it is not going to work. So I have basically created a payload with ID of this and then role is user. And by the way, this ID that I'm using right now is the ID of the actually currently logged in user. So if I just show you, if I open a new terminal and if I execute this command pnpm-dlx prisma studio, you can see in the user table, I only have this one user and the ID of the user is this. Now, this is not the best way to handle this particular situation. The best practice would be to something like seeding your data, seeding the test data to the database, and then using that information as the payload. But for the purpose of this video, I'm just keeping this simple. The important thing to understand at this point is that this object should exactly match this JWT token payload structure. And I am creating a try catch finally block over here, as you can see. Inside of this try block, I'm actually launching the browser, creating a new context, and then I'm dynamically importing this next auth JWT, this encode function. I cannot use this statically over here because it basically throws me an error. So I have to import this dynamically like this. And then I'm essentially calling this encode method. Now, when you call this encode method, it basically expects you to pass this object. In this object, you need to pass three important properties. First of all, in the token, you need to specify the payload that we have created over here, which is this one. And then second, we need to specify the next auth secret. Okay. And then if you're using next auth version 5, you also need to provide the salt value. Now, this is really important. If you're in the production, the salt value should be something like this. But in case of local development, this is going to be something like this. Okay. Now, after generating this session token, we can actually add a cookie to the context. So we have this add cookies method available in the context object, which is again going to accept an array of the cookies. So in this one, I'm just having this single object, which just represents this one particular cookie. Now this has some of the important properties, but the most important thing is this name property. The name should be exactly like this, authjs.session-token if you're using next auth version 5. And the value is going to be what we have created over here, session token. Domain is going to be domain in this case, which is localhost. And then we have this path only, HTTP only true. Secure is set to false right now because we are in the development mode. If you are in the production, you should set this to true. And then we are specifying when this cookie should be expired. And then after that, we are actually saving this cookie information inside of the storage state path. So if you take a look at this constant, you can see that I'm actually saving the context information inside of the state.json file. So this dir name is basically specify the location of this current file. So the location of this current file is this global setup, as you can see. And just inside of this file, we are actually placing the state.json. All right. And then in case of error, if the error is an instance of error, we simply log the error message and then we throw the error. And then finally, we are going to close the context and the browser. So the flow for this would be something like this. Whenever you execute either of your scripts command, pnpm run test end-to-end or end-to-end UI, first of all, this file is going to be executed. So what we are going to do, we are first going to check if this auth secret is present or not. If this is present, we are going to come here, create this payload, launch a browser, create a new context, then dynamically import this encode method. We call this encode method, pass the necessary data to it to get the session token. And then this is going to be the value for this cookie. We add this cookie to the context, which basically like saying add it to the current context, like add it to the current page or something. And then we are basically saving that context information inside of a file, state.json. We do this so that we do not have to follow this process every single time. And then if there's any error related to this setup, we are going to log that error and throw this error so that it stops the execution. And then finally, when the setup is complete, we're simply going to close the context and close the browser. And then in the playwright.config.ts file, we just need to specify the location of the global setup that we have created. So I can do something like this, that our global setup file exists in this location, test setup and then global setup. I need to import path from path. Okay, so here's I'm specifying that this is the location of my global setup file. And then in this use property, I'm going to specify the location of my state file. So if this file is present, this is essentially going to use this file for all of the tests. And this is what it is going to make us authenticated in our application. And since we are including this over here, that means by default, we'll get the logged in state. Now let's see if this is working or not. I'm going to cancel out this whole process. Then I'm going to restart this npm run test end-to-end UI. And when I hit enter, this basically opened this window. But if you take a look at this setup folder, you can see that we now have this state.json file present over here. And this contains that cookie information that we have added to the context, like this. Okay, let's see if we are actually logged in. So if we are logged in, our authenticated user test should pass. So in this, what we are actually doing here, just to show you, we're just trying to go to the settings page, and then we are expecting this heading to be present, which contains the setting page. So if I click on this green button to run the test, you can see this is actually working as expected. That means we are logged in, and now we can do and test all of the features in our application without doing a manual login. But this has one problem. If I try running this unauthenticated user test, this is not going to work. Let me show you. You can see this is not working. You can see we tried going to this auth sign up page, but since we are logged in, we cannot access these auth routes. So this is a problem now. So what we have done so far is in the Playwright configuration file, we have specified to use the storage state for all of the tests. But if we are using the state file for all of the tests, that means user is going to be logged in every single time, and we won't be able to access any public routes. I shouldn't say public routes, but you know what I mean by that. So how do you fix this? Well, here's how you fix this. You can go to this auth.spec.ts file. So what you can do basically within this describe block, you cannot place this inside of the test. You have to place this inside of the describe block only. So here's what I'm doing basically. I'm actually saying before each test, give me access to the context and then clear out all the cookies. So for any test that I include in this describe block, it is going to clear the cookies for all of them before running those tests. And that is how we can make a user temporarily logged out. So by doing something like this, this is going to clear out the cookies. That means here the user is not authenticated, essentially not logged in, but here the user is going to be logged in. Let's see if this is working or not. So if I just come here, reload this one, and I'm simply going to play this button, click on this button to essentially run all of that test. And you can see all of the tests are passing. Perfect. Okay, so this was pretty interesting. So far, we have basically looked at how do you set up Playwright properly in your Next.js project? How do you write your tests for public routes, essentially unauthenticated users? And then how do you write tests for protected routes, authenticated users? We also saw how do you use this global setup file to persist the login state to save yourself a lot of time. Okay, let's talk about one more case now. So remember in the beginning, I told you that our app has this feature that if your role is admin, you can access this admin page also. That means if I come here and change my role to admin, I can now access the admin page, as you can see. Let's see how can we test something like this. So within this authenticated user describe blog, I'm actually going to add another test. And let's say that only admin can access the admin page. And here we need to go to this, let's say admin page. When I go to this admin page, I expect this page to contain something. Well, this also should contain an heading element with a text of admin page. Okay, that means I expect a heading to be present in this page with a text of admin page, right? But if you take a look at the payload that we are using to log in the user, you can see in this payload we are specifying the role is user. That means for this particular test, which we have written over here, 1 second. Yeah. So for this particular test that we have written over here, we should not be able to access the admin page right now. That means this test should fail. Let's see what is going on. So I'll come here, reload this one. I'm going to run this. Only admin can access the admin page. So when I run this test, you can see we are not going to that admin page. And then after that few seconds, we got timed out and this test failed basically. But if I try going to the settings page, it should work easily because our role right now is user. So let's see how we can handle this scenario. How do we test only admin can access the admin page? How do we test this particular thing? So for this specific scenario, you can do something like this. First of all, I can create an updated payload object. In this, I'm specifying that the role is going to be admin. And then just like I can get access to the page, I can also access this context like this. I'm simply going to again add the cookie with exact same name, with exact all of these same values. And then we just need to generate the session token with this updated payload and pass that as a value to this cookie. So probably within this test folder, I can actually create an utils folder. I'm going to create this file auth.ts. Within this file, I'm simply going to create this function get session token for test. This is going to accept the payload. Then I'm going to export this function out of this file. And then I'm going to get the encode function from JWT. And just like we were calling this encode function in the global setup, I can actually come here, get this piece of code from here, go back to this auth.ts file. I'm going to do something like this. So let's make sure that this is an async function. This is going to give us the session token. And then I'm going to actually return the session token from this file. We also do need access to this auth secret. So I'm going to import .env from .env. Then I'm going to call .env.config so that I can access environment variables in this file. And since now I'm using this secret over here, I can do a check first of all. If process.env.auth secret does not exist, I'm going to throw an error. Then I can use the same function in both of these places. First of all, in the global setup, I can come here. I can remove this. We actually do need to await this as this is going to be an async function. So let's call this get session token for test. And we're going to pass payload in this one like this. And now I can get rid of this line from here. And I believe this environment check should also be removed from here. And then in the auth.spec.ts inside of the test, I can actually come here and import this function, get session token for test, more like this. Okay, let's see if this is working or not. First of all, I'm going to restart this. Okay, so it seems like I'm actually getting this error related to Next.auth encode function that I cannot import this statically. So I'm going to actually import this dynamically to fix this problem. So let's go inside of this auth.ts file. I'm going to remove this encode from here. And just before using this encode, I'm actually going to get encode. We also do need to await this, I believe. Okay, now let's test this again. Okay, let's see if this is working or not. First of all, I'm going to run all of the authenticated user test. And it seems like both of the tests are passing. So first of all, we can access the setting page as you can see. But in the second test, in which we can only do this if we are an admin. And now you can see that we are actually able to access the admin page. So this is how you can actually modify the token payload to generate a session token. And then you update the cookie again to test features like this. Okay, let me explain one more time how all of this is working. First of all, if I go to my normal application, if I refresh this page, you can see that my current role is admin, and that is the reason I'm allowed to access this admin page. But if I go to the setting page and change my role to user, then I won't be able to access this admin page as you can see over here, even if I try going it from the address bar itself. So let's say admin, you can see that I'm not able to access that admin page. And when we generated our session information initially, we set the role to user. So what we did is inside of the test in which we want to test that specific role, what we did, we basically created another session token with a different payload altogether. And then we added this same cookie in the context. So if you add the same cookie in the context, this basically overrides the old cookie. So now in this case, the role has been changed to admin just for this particular test. And for all of the other tests, it is still going to be normal user only. So we have basically looked at how do you write test for unauthenticated users, like how do you test public routes, then how do you test authenticated users, how do you persist the login state by using the global setup file and the state.json file, how do you modify the session cookie to update the payload data, right? Now, if you take a look at this global setup file, you can see that we are basically hard coding this payload information. Well, this is not the recommended way to do something like this. I told you this because I wanted to keep things simple as much as possible. Ideally, what you should have done is, in the global setup itself, you should have seeded some of the test data inside of the database. And from that test data, you have generated the payload session token. You get the idea, right? Now, before I wrap up this video, I want to tell you one more important thing. So you see this state.json file. Now, similar to this, you could imagine that you could be storing a bunch of things that are only required during the running of the test. You also have this option of cleaning up all these files after you're done with the test. So similar to this global setup file, you can actually create another file, global teardown. Again, the name of the file can be anything, that is not important, more like this. And in this file, I'm just importing this file system module and then path. I'm essentially saying is, in this current directory, I have this file state.json. Simply delete this file. And then inside of this playwright.config.ts, just like we have added the global setup, I can actually come here and I can add this global teardown path.resolve. And then I can actually pass my path like this. So this is going to be global teardown. Okay, so this is pretty much what you needed to do in order to clean up these files. So let's see if this is working or not. Now you just have to keep in mind one important thing. When you are running your test with UI mode, for example, pnpm run test e2e UI, after you're done with the test, make sure you close your browser window first. Playwright is going to get the chance of actually deleting the state.json file, as you can see over here. If you try to terminate the process altogether by pressing the command C or Control C, depending upon the operating system that you are in, it is not going to delete that file that is present over here. In this case, state.json. Otherwise, if you're just running your test without the UI mode, you can simply see that state.json file was there for a few seconds, then the test ran, and then after that, that file has been deleted successfully. That's all for this video. If you found this video valuable in any way, do like and subscribe to my channel. I will catch you in the next one.